Vance Ginn. He's president of Ginn Economic Consulting and former chief economist at the Office of Management and Budget. Vance, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. And before we get started on anything else, we just heard about this interest rate cut there in that previous report. Your thoughts?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. And I think that once again, the Federal Reserve is looking to find ways to reduce interest rates, as they did here across the economy, as the federal debt continues to soar. And that's creating a lot of havoc throughout the economy with higher interest rates and everything else. My concern still is that inflation remains much higher than that 2% longer run target that Jerome Powell mentioned. It's closer to 2.7% if you exclude food and energy, which of course we all buy. And so what I'm seeing is still a lot of heat or elevated inflation throughout the economy. So I'm worried about us cutting interest rates too far, too fast. Instead, I'd rather the Federal Reserve be cutting their balance sheet. They have too much. It's close to $7 trillion on their balance sheet. That's what really manipulates the economy and distorts a lot of the different markets throughout our economy. And so I'm not surprised. I was expecting that they would cut their interest rate, but I would rather them not have, given all of the other issues that are going on across the economy.
Building off of everything you just said there, you did write a piece in the Daily Economy titled, "Will the Fed Repeat 1970s Policy Mistakes?" Break that down for our viewers. What mistakes were those, and what are you seeing in danger of repeating itself?
Yeah, so back in the 1970s, we had this period of the great inflation with a lot of money creation throughout the economy by the Federal Reserve. And so what they saw was you had Paul Volcker come in as Fed chair, and he cut the money supply. And they also raised interest rates dramatically because of that cut in the money supply. And when that happened, you did see inflation come back down from around 8% to closer to 2 or 3%. But then they put the gas pedal back on, if you will, and increased the money supply, cut interest rates, and inflation soared even higher. So it increased to about 11% year over year. And that's something I'm worried about, because then interest rates went up to close to 20% compared to the 5% or 4.5% that we're at today. And I don't want to see the economy get in that sort of situation again. And so I don't think that the fight against inflation, this beast, if you will, is dead. And I think we need to continue to slay this dragon. And the biggest part to do that is by cutting the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. And so let's not repeat those past mistakes. Let's focus on the future. And that's got to be one of lower inflation and more economic growth.
Now, you do mention there, right, cutting balance sheets. Now, let's move to Trump, right? We just saw he is now president-elect. What would a Trump administration have to do to lower inflation and stabilize the economy over the next 4 years?
It's a great question. I hope it's one that they'll be looking at. As someone who was in the Trump administration during the last term, I think one thing that we've got to focus on this time around is making sure we cut spending. Spending is the big driver, of course, of the federal debt, and debt reaching close to $36 trillion, net interest payments being $1 trillion. We have a massive budget problem. A fiscal crisis is what I've called it. We've got to look at ways to restrain and cut government spending. If that doesn't happen, then Congress and the president really will have done nothing to address the monetary issues that we have going on with higher inflation. At the same time, I think we need to make sure that the Trump tax cuts from 2017 become permanent and find other ways to have pro-growth measures throughout the economy. And the other big part here is to cut regulations. We did a lot of deregulating in the first administration for the Trump administration. I hope they will continue that during the second administration, because of course, whenever you regulate something, that's just a hidden tax on people that raises the cost for a lot of the goods and services that we buy on a daily basis. These are all things that Trump can start to make good headroom, good space here to make sure that inflationary pressures come down and ultimately to have more economic growth.
Vance, you mentioned cutting taxes there. Now, I think a main question people are asking is, can Trump eliminate the federal income tax?
Well, look, I'm in favor of eliminating the income tax. I don't think that you should tax someone's labor, because that's something they should own, and then they should decide. They should choose how they want to spend that money thereafter. But of course, it brings in about $2.2 trillion is the personal income taxes that are brought in, and so that's a large amount of money. That means that you either got to cut spending dramatically, which I would be in favor of, or you've got to find something to replace that revenue. And there's some discussion of using tariffs. I myself, I'm opposed to tariffs. I don't think we need a protectionist sort of direction. We need more pro-growth policies. So maybe you move to a national consumption tax or something like that with a very broad base. Or at the end of the day, why not just a very flat a low income tax rate. And that would be something that's doable, I think, in the foreseeable future, instead of the progressive marginal income tax rate system that's highly distortive and creates more barriers and less economic growth across the economy.
Now, stay on the topic of affordability for Americans, because at the end of the day, that's what the government is trying to do, right? Helping Americans make life more affordable. Trump has said he'll cut the cost of energy in half. Now, based on what you're seeing, do you think that's possible? And how would that really impact Americans?
Well, look, energy is a huge cost to Americans. If they look at their balance sheet or they look at their budget every month, like I do, you look and see how much you're paying gas, electricity, other things that are creeping up, even food, because all those electricity and energy costs go into the price of food that we pay. And with 3 kids, I can see those costs, they've been soaring. And so one way to do that is to reduce the price of energy. And I think instead of subsidizing and giving tax breaks and things of that nature, we should be rolling back the Inflation, quote unquote, Reduction Act that the Biden administration passed along with Congress, which is driving up a lot of our prices and inflation across the economy. And it's subsidizing and giving tax breaks to unreliable sources of energy like wind and solar. These are not the directions we should go as America. Instead, let's focus on removing those regulations and allow for oil, natural gas, nuclear, those types of things to help to reduce the price of energy and make it more reliable, so we're not dependent on what's happening by government, and we're not looking at blackouts or brownouts and things of that nature, but that we know that we turn the light on, that it'll actually come on across the country.
Vance, the last 30 seconds here, very quick. Based on everything you're saying here and all the issues, economically speaking, that we're facing, will Trump be able to improve on all of these issues, or are some of these things kind of out of his control or have too much of an impact for him to recover from in the next 4 years?
I mean, it's a great point. The executive branch, the presidency, doesn't have a lot of power when it comes to government spending, as that's the power of the purse by Congress. Also, a lot of the taxes are going to be passed by Congress. But the President Trump, has a bully pulpit where he can use it to his advantage to move the ball closer to what voters want and ultimately get less spending, lower taxes, less regulation, and we can let people prosper all across this great country and have some optimism once again.
Optimism, always very important, no matter what happens. Vance, Ginn, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.